Welcome everybody. I appreciate you coming here today. I know what a tough time it was, the time crunch if you're coming from another district. So I want to also welcome the districts our neighboring districts that chose to join us today. My name is Jackie Growey and I'm a High-Cap TOSA for Kansas School District. Last year, the High-Cap committee went to the High-Cap state meeting in Tacoma last year. We had the honor of hearing Ian speak to depth and complexity. And he was so engaging that when we came back to our first district High-Cap meeting, the first thing that people wanted to talk about on the agenda was how can we get this guy here so that he can speak to everybody. So I was really excited that he lives local and he was available, and so I was able to book him, and we're all really super excited about that. Ian was a 6th grade teacher, and he's been talking to districts for a long time, and he also was a High-Cap student himself, so he has a breadth of knowledge to share with us today. So I would like you all to help me welcome Ian Byrd.
Hello, everybody. This is a really nice room to be in. I feel like it makes a difference when it's a nice room. So my name's Ian. I taught 6th grade at an elementary school, so I taught multiple subjects. I grew up in Southern California, and I taught there, and I moved up to Portland about 2 years ago. So I'm relatively new up here. I really like it. So I grew up in we call it Gifted and Talented program down in California, and then I ended up getting hired to work in the same program that I grew up in as a kid, and I student taught in one of the gifted programs. So that's how I got into this, and then eventually I started writing at this website, birdseed.com, about stuff that I was doing in my classroom, and people were hungry for information about what to do with students who were ready for more, and I knew when I was student teaching in this program, I was doing a lot of Google searching for what you're supposed to do, and there just wasn't a lot out there. And I was really specifically new to the depth and complexity tools. My master teacher was using them in her classroom, our whole school district was using them, so I was like learning about these as I was, messing up everything as a student teacher. So I started writing about these online. And so something that I noticed is that not a lot of people get a second look at the depth and complexity tools, that there's often, you get like an introduction to them, and then you don't get a chance to come back and see what more you can do. And there's a lot of them, there's 11 tools, and so the introduction itself is pretty meaty, like it might take weeks to really understand the basics. But then, a lot of people get stuck at the basics because you don't get an opportunity to go beyond it. So that's the goal, is to talk a little bit about once you know how they work, the basics, what can we do beyond that? If you want to email me, this is my email, ian@birdseed.com. I would love to hear from you, especially if you try some of these things and they're successful or they're not successful. I'd love to hear how it goes. And then I'll have the slides available at birdseed.com/October 10. And those will be up later tonight, so they're not up there yet. All right, first, if you would say hello to somebody that you don't already know, so you might have to move a little bit, but let's take a few minutes just to meet somebody else around us.
Hi.
to wrap up your hellos. Okay. Okay, so, welcome. Hopefully you met somebody new. If you stared at your computer the whole time, that wasn't the point of that time, but let's do better in the future. Please, during our time together, please participate, which means I'll do some examples, but then we'll have some chances for you to think, and so please share out. It makes it a lot more interesting when we hear from people of all kinds of different backgrounds about how to use these. Don't bother the people around you, which means don't have side conversations. People think that when they whisper, nobody can hear them, but everybody can hear you, and it sounds like this. And I can hear you, and it gets me off my game. Okay, so don't do that. If you're taking notes on your computer, make sure you're taking notes and not looking at whatever else. Okay, so we're moving beyond 101. So the first round of you have met these and you know what to do with them. What are we going to do after that? So things like this, you know the names, you know their meanings, you've maybe used them with students, maybe students know the basics. So a lot of this is also helping students move beyond the basic 101 of just like knowing the names, things like that. Before we get started, what grades do we teach? Are there people who are elementary teachers? Okay. Oh, could you show me with your fingers what grade you teach? That's a good idea. Okay. And then do we have middle school teachers? Okay. Whoa. In the back. Do we have high school teachers? High school? Okay. Oh, there's somebody over there too. Great. Are there people who are just language arts teachers? Some language arts? Oh, okay, a bunch. How about, social studies? People who teach social studies? Science teachers? Okay. Do we have math teachers? Just math. Okay, great. Somebody who teaches something other than those core subjects, what do you teach? Okay, is that just like everything?
I have all grades.
Okay. Anybody else have, yeah?
I'm a school psychologist.
Okay, school psychologists, yeah, people with other roles. Okay. So I have the kind of unusual experience of teaching 6th grade at an elementary school instead of middle school, and so I taught everything with my students as well. So, and these were very useful across the board. So one difficulty with depth and complexity is that there is not like an official resource to go to. There's not like a set of books you can buy that were written like to explain how to use them. I really wish there were like an official guide to how you're supposed to use them. The resources that are out there are mostly just like examples and like you can buy the magnets and stuff like that, but not really like official ways about how they're supposed to be used with students. And so what happens is it turns into this like game of telephone where everybody like somebody went to the conference one year and heard a like 50-minute talk about it from somebody who heard it from somebody else, and then they come back and tell it to people, and it becomes very much this like, I heard it like 20th hand. I was super fortunate because a lot of the teachers I worked with had been trained on these from the creators, from Sarah Kaplan and Betty Gould. And I know Betty Gould's son who publishes these, so I have the unique opportunity of knowing a lot of people. So I got it like secondhand instead of like 20th hand. And so then, like I said that I would go and search on Google for information about how do I use these things that I see in the classroom. So I would go and I would do this. And so then we get there's tons of information out there about depth and complexity, and the problem is it is all 20th hand, and after we go through some of this, hopefully you'll see it's a lot of the same problems because everybody just has this one first layer and then they haven't really had like an official explanation because there really isn't an official explanation. I see some things that I have made that are on here, which I think is funny. I do not use lacy stuff like this and things that I think it's very utilitarian. Okay, so let's look at some examples of these. And so I'm going to start with this one because this is like a tool that I see used a lot. All of these mistakes were made by me, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm making fun of anybody else. Like, I did all this stuff. I think all of these mistakes are perfectly fine to do when you're first learning them. So what we're talking about, what do we do beyond that? Okay, so this is a really common thing to do, is to give students like some kind of graphic organizer that has a bunch of the definite complexity tools on there. So this one has 9. It might have more or less than that. But this represents a bunch of, I think, problems that we can move past if we're talking about what do we do in like a second level. Okay, so it's okay, this is fine to use like when you're starting, like it's a good starting place. And for students, it might be a good starting place also. But we want them to go past this kind of a graphic organizer. And so our goal isn't just to use depth and complexity, so just because we're starting to use it, that's like not the end goal. The focus really is this here too. The purpose of the depth and complexity tools is to really affect students' thinking. We can use the tools and not affect students' thinking very much, or we can use them and really stretch their thinking. So to me, that's like the guiding principle. It's like, are my students, like the way that they think, is it being affected by these tools, or is it just more worksheets? Okay, this is like my guideline. Sorry if this brain grosses you out, it kind of grosses me out, but it's obviously a brain. Is to ask, am I asking students to really think? Or like, are they having to slow down and stop and consider and like put their pencil down and think for a while? Or are they really just remembering or looking things up? I feel like when I was in the classroom, we did way too much remembering, and there wasn't enough really like real thinking going on. And so hopefully by the end of this, we'll see some ways that you can take depth and complexity and really get students' brains sweaty. So this is our goal, get kids' brains sweaty. And I would tell my students this. I would be like, we're gonna try to get your brains sweaty today, and then they get into it and they're like doing like sweat from their brains and stuff. But letting them know, like some of the things we're doing, the goal is to slow you down and really get you thinking. Some of our advanced students have never had to slow down and really think. And especially if they're older, this can be a very unpleasant feeling to have to stop and think and maybe not get it right at first. So the sweaty brain is our imagery for the afternoon. Okay, so here's some common problems. Again, I did all of these. I'm not making fun of this person, this graphic organizer in particular. Okay, so one thing people do is call them the icons. And so there are icons, there are the images, but I think it's important to call them what they really are. I really like the term thinking tools, that each of these is a tool to change the way you think. Prompts is also a way that I've heard the creators talk about these. Each of these is a prompt, that it should prompt students' thinking. If we just call them icons, like it's just like emphasizing these little images, and they're cute and stuff, but they're not the purpose. Like the icon isn't the purpose, it is the fact that it's a tool to use. Again, if I were talking to students, this slide took me quite a while to get it just right, I would talk about the idea that each of these is like a hammer, or a wrench, or a screwdriver, or a drill. Like each one of these thinking tools is a different way for your brain to work on an idea. And you have to practice with each one, and they all have a different job, but each one can help us do something that the other one can't do. And if we don't have the tools, we're much more limited. So talking about them as thinking tools rather than just the pictures. Okay, so beware. The number one problem with this graphic organizer we saw with the big table is it's got too many prompts at once. And so this is something I would do, is try to figure out how can I use them all every time, because that seems better if there's lots of them. And it's okay if you're doing it like an intro with it. But the problem is if we get so many of these, it doesn't give us that goal that we're going for. So you can think of these as like different spices or different tools. And you don't always use all of your spices with every dish, or it's going to be a mess. You don't have to use the hammer and the wrench and the screwdriver and the drill every time you do something. Like a lot of times you'll just use one or two. So too many can like spoil the broth, I guess. It leads to a checklist mentality. So if you are thinking from a student's point of view, and you get a worksheet with 11 prompts that you have to go through every single time, or 9, to me, when I look at it this way, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to do do this, then I have to do this, then I have to get this one done, and it looks like I just have to check all these boxes off. And to me, that's not making students' brains sweat. It just seems like a bunch of work. And if you think about it from a student's perspective, they're just like, oh, I have to do all these different things. So too many can become overwhelming, and it leads to, instead of deep and complex thinking, too much depth and complexity leads to fast and shallow thinking, because kids are like, oh, I gotta get this worksheet done. So they're going to go through it, and they don't have a lot of time to spend with each one, so of course they're going to go as fast as they can through each one. And then we're not getting deep thinking or complex thinking, we're getting how fast can I get through this worksheet? Especially if they get this worksheet over and over and over again. This is our ironic warning that the more depth and complexity that we add to like one task, actually students' thinking has to become shallower for each tool because they have this limited amount of time to work on it and energy. So it creates this checklist mentality. It leads to actually shallow thinking, and this tool is overly generic. Up on top, it has topic. So the idea, I think, with this is that you can make 1 million Xerox copies of this, and then you can use it with anything that you're teaching. You just give it out to students, and they can write whatever they're learning up on the top, and they use the same worksheet over and over and over. So this is, again, it's okay if they're just like practicing and learning what they do, but when we really want students' brains to sweat, we have to be more like purposeful about which of the prompts we're going to choose. Again, you don't use the same spices every time with any recipe. Like you're going to pick the exact 2 or 3 that are perfect. So if you're learning about the civil rights movement and you're learning about like an experiment in chemistry, you could use the same tool, but it would be better if we like customize it to think, what exactly do I want students to do with their brain? Which ones do I think would work best with this content versus this content? The prompts are super flexible, so they can be used with just about anything, but we don't necessarily want to use the exact same thing. So this idea of like a one-size-fits-all graphic organizer, it ends up not fitting anything very well. So instead, we want to I spent a lot of time on this one. We want to purposefully pick the perfect prompts that push thinking for a particular task. Okay, so if you were teaching the civil rights movement, not everybody teaches this, but hopefully we know what this is, which of the prompts would you choose? Like if you had to choose just 3, what would be the ones that you would choose? There's no right or wrong answers, but you might see some that really fit well with this content. Would you discuss with the people around you which prompts might you focus on?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from everybody. I'm here too. I have the pictures. I don't know. Yeah, so I'll put that link in there.
Okay, language and discipline, rules, trends, unanswered questions, ethics, big idea, relate over time, perspective.
Okay.
So I would do
If you'll start to wrap up. What might be, if you're going to pick 2 or 3 or so, what might be your favorite choices here? Okay, multiple perspectives. Change over time.
Big idea.
Ethics.
big idea,
Trends.
big idea.
Okay, you want to use big idea? Is there one that seems like it's less useful than the others with this content? Okay, yeah. Yeah, patterns fine.
Language of the discipline, so you wouldn't necessarily have like science or science, for example, or math has its own language, music has its own.
Okay. The language of the discipline might be less useful.
I'm sorry?
So you said language of the discipline.
Right, like
Yeah.
it's not a tier 3 specific domain language, most of it.
Sure. Anything else that you think might not be as useful?
Probably unanswered questions.
Okay. I could think of a way to use all three of those, but I agree that some of them might not be, if I had to pick three, I might not pick them. But if you wanted to pick patterns, for example, you could figure out a way to use it. Like you might think about patterns in other similar situations. So they could all be applied, and none of them are necessarily wrong for the context. There is language, it's like the names of the laws that got passed or things like that, or specific language to the situation. But yeah, so some might stand out a little. Ethics, I think, stands out, like, oh, pick me! Multiple perspectives, I think, stands out. You want to talk about change over time, I think like some of those really stand out. Rules stands out, like, especially looking at rules, how they might change over time, too. If we were learning about fraction division or a math type problem in general, what might be a prompt that you would use? Patterns, rules. You want to know the steps to like solve them.
Pattern.
Yeah. Maybe the language of the discipline to me stands out. Like you'd want to know numerator, denominator, like reciprocal. There might be like language might stand out as more important here. So if we're going to pick just 3 or 4, they might be a different set than with civil rights movement. Looking at literature, looking at a story, if you know Hatchet specifically, that might even help you decide what you would use. Yeah, multiple perspectives seems like it would stand out if you're talking about like characters and the way they think in a certain way.
Details.
Oh, okay, essential details. Unanswered question. Yeah, especially like at the end of a chapter or something, what's going to happen? So again, any of the 11 would work. Like that's what makes them really nice, is that they're super flexible in that way. But some of them really stand out, and if we get students to focus on just 3, we can do a lot more with it, with like the limited amount of time that we have and the amount of like energy that a student has to do this thinking. Okay, so instead of trying to use all of the prompts or using too many of them, like really being purposeful about which ones do I want students to think about here. And again, that goal of like, what's going to push them to go deeper with the content. Do we have any thoughts, questions, anecdotes, complaints? Yeah.
I think a few audience members may not be familiar with all 11. Do you have anything to just briefly like swipe through all 11 and just say what they are?
Not really. That was like the topic.
Yeah, they don't have service.
Maybe the first slide has the names. Okay, the names are very tiny. If you're unfamiliar with these, I'm sorry. The lips are language of the discipline. You're looking at specific language within the content that you're learning about. Reciprocal was our example. Details, I think this one's important to emphasize that they're essential details, like the important little pieces of information. I know a kindergarten, first grade teacher that does this whole thing in the beginning of the year talking about what's important and what's not important, even though it's a detail. So not every detail is important. Ethics are like problems, things that have pros and cons, things that have right and wrong. Civil rights movement, major ethical issues. Unanswered questions is things we don't know yet. And this one I feel like it's really underused. I think this one's really powerful, but I definitely didn't use it to its greatest extent. Like unanswered questions should be things we don't know or are unknowable. Like as a race, we cannot figure this out. Change over time. How is something changing as we go through the years? Across the disciplines, we're purposefully looking at how do we connect across our content areas in this one topic. Civil rights. How do we see science? How do we see language arts? How do we see different content areas? Even though it's social studies, how might it connect to other things? Trends is the one that I have the hardest time understanding. I think of it as like small changes, like how something is currently changing. I have a hard time totally understanding how it's similar to and different from change over time. In social studies, I think trends is much more obvious about how it might work. But we would think about it as like, what's changing right now and like what's causing that? What are the effects? Patterns are things that are repeating, but they don't have to repeat. Our big idea is how do we sum up a topic in like one sentence? How do we ignore all the details and try to get the big idea across? Rules are things that need to happen, or it's represented by like a hierarchy, so things that you have to follow. I often contrast these two with students. Patterns are things that tend to repeat and happen, but if a pattern breaks, you don't get like punished for it. And rules are things that have to happen, or there's often like a consequence. Multiple perspectives. How do different people view the same situation? Thoughts, questions? Yeah.
We were just talking about where math teachers over here are trying to figure it out just because it's new to us. And we were talking about how the 8 mathematical practice standards, if you're familiar with those, it feels like they fit a lot of these. The depth and complexity is built into those 8 mathematical practices already.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard someone say that, but yeah, I think you're right. The idea behind these, the origin story is that the people who created these, they interviewed a whole bunch of professionals across all these different domains, and they were trying to get at what does an expert know about a topic that a novice doesn't know, or actually how does an expert think about their topic in a way that a new person doesn't think about the topic. And so these are the kinds of things they were pulling out. As expert teachers, people who are professionals, you could apply these all to teaching in a way that someone off the street wouldn't think about teaching in the same way. Like, you can probably think about language of the discipline. Like, 5,000 acronyms related to education that most people don't. You know about ethical issues within education that the average person wouldn't know about. You know a lot about current trends in education and the new directions that things are going right now. So that's the idea. So it makes sense that it would fit with the mathematical practices, because those are like trying to think like a mathematician. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, so we left off here. There are 11 of them, so it feels like there's a lot, and then we might feel like we need to use them all, but I would say really be purposeful about the ones that you're picking that match the task really nicely. Okay, second, beware. Okay, I call this one lonely prompts. I think it's very common, if you're first starting with them, just to put the icon there, like just the image. But if it's just sitting there, so this is the ethics tool, it's kind of like if we're talking about math, it's kind of like if an operation is just sitting there by itself. If you see a plus sign, you know what a plus sign means. I hope we all know what a plus sign means. But you don't know what to do because you're missing a bunch of the information. So I know, okay, I'm supposed to be thinking about ethical problems, pros and cons, ways people might disagree, but I don't know what I'm doing here. So a lonely prompt doesn't really give students enough information. Okay, so looking back at this graphic organizer, it's super common, and I use it, and I see it in classrooms all the time. Can you see the lonely prompts? It's just the icon sitting there. It has the name under it in teeny tiny letters, but it's just the image. So when the prompt, or the icon itself is just sitting there by itself, there's no direction about what you're supposed to do with it. Like if you were putting something together and you just had a picture of a hammer, you'd be like, okay, I know it's a hammer, what am I supposed to hammer? Like, what am I supposed to do with it? So that's the problem we have here, is kids don't get direction about what they're supposed to do. If we do not give students clear directions about what they're supposed to do, they will do the easiest possible thing to get it done as fast as they can. So when the prompt is just sitting there by itself, students will default to a really low level of thinking. And in this case, again, we have 11 things they have to do, or 9 things they have to do, and then we don't tell them what exactly to do. They're going to go to the easiest possible thing, which I have seen this infinity times. Students will make a list of 3 examples for each one, and that's like the default student behavior, is they'll say, okay, language of the discipline, I'm going to list, and their lines aren't there, but they will say, okay, I'm going to list 3 examples of language in this topic. Now I'm going to list 3 details. Now I will list 3 patterns. And so they default to this listing behavior. And then if I get 30-something kids turning this in, and they've all like listed 3 of each one, now I don't really know if they did a good job or not. Like without the direction for what they're supposed to do, it's hard for me to look at it and say they did it. So prompts by themselves lead to low level of thinking. Okay, so here's an example. Say we're learning about the American Revolution. I think that's what this is. What's that? All right. Okay. If we're learning about the American Revolution, or whatever, and we give students this thing, or something like it, and they get to the ethics one, which is again about problems, pros and cons, things like that, their default thinking is, okay, I'm learning about the American Revolution, I'm going to list like 3 problems that happened in the American Revolution. Boston Tea Party. Something else. About taxation without representation. Like, they'll just come up with 3 problems. Then as a teacher, I'm like, when I look at it, I'm like, oh, yeah, those are the 3 things that happened. But the brains aren't sweating here. They're just like thinking of 3 things. This one's weird. Multiple perspectives. The idea of multiple perspectives is you're like putting someone else's glasses on and thinking from their point of view. It's like very complex thinking. What students will do if they see this is they'll list 3 perspectives. And they'll say, loyalists, like maybe common people, soldiers. Like they'll just come up with 3 different types of people involved. They didn't even do any thinking. Like the whole idea is like to think, what if you were a loyalist? Or what if you were part of the rebellion? What if you were the general? And they get them thinking. Instead, they just list 3 things. Unanswered questions, I think, is the funniest one. So then they just come up with 3 questions they have, and then that's it. And then they turn it in, and I would be like, check, check, check. Okay, it's done. And we didn't do anything. We didn't do anything with the unanswered questions. So students will default to this listing behavior, and it's not the purpose of these. The purpose is not get students to list 3 examples of each thing. So there's no direction is the problem, and it's hard for me to know if they did it well. So they listed 3 unanswered questions, 100% right. Like looking at it, I wouldn't know what to do. So instead, when we're using those depth and complexity tools, they need a verb, like they need some kind of direction for what students are going to do with it. What are students going to do with this particular tool? So they should be embedded into like a sentence, or more than a sentence. We have to be giving them direction. So just putting the little diamond shape by itself isn't going to tell them what to do. We need to think about what do we want them to do with these ethical issues. If we want them to just list 3, then we can write it here, list 3. But hopefully we want them to go beyond just listing 3 examples of actual issues. Okay, here's a source of this, of why this becomes a problem, is if you do your depth and complexity Google search, which some of you did because you didn't know the names, you will guaranteed find something like this, or something very, very similar to this. We get a chart. This is before the official icons came out. We get sample questions, and then there's, I don't know, some other words over here. Okay, so if you look at these sample questions, what do you notice? A pattern. Wait, did you not hear me? Oh, just kidding. The pattern is the word what? What? So these samples are all asking for a list. And so this is like, and this is fine, this is fine to start with. If you're just learning how to use them, it's fine to just make lists of things to get used to it. But eventually, I don't want students to just keep listing the elements that occur. I don't want them to just list the information that's unclear. I want them to do something with it. So be aware that finding this stuff online, you could probably find like 10 different versions of this, and they'll all have the same basic questions, and they're all really low level. Like basically, it's like identify or make a list. So we end up with these kinds of questions. What are the rules of multiplication? What are the patterns in Shakespearean sonnets? What's the big idea of the War of 1812? What are the essential details of a chorus? And these they're fine questions to start with, but if that's all we ever ask is the what are, or like give me some examples, we're not really making the brain sweat. So Bloom's taxonomy is a great place to go if you want to think, okay, I need verbs beyond make a list, basically, or what are, or identify. So we can go to Bloom, and we'll go through here and look at some examples a little bit later. But whatever like thinking framework that you might be familiar with is a great way to go and say, how can I go beyond just making a list? Or like, what are the questions? What are the ethical issues? What are the patterns? Is very like low on Bloom's taxonomy. We're just asking them to remember or look up and then make a list. So again, coming back to the idea, we want students thinking to be pushed, especially our most advanced students. Like that's the purpose of these is, can you get the kid who blazes through everything, can you get them to slow down and like really have to work on something? Again, thinking or remembering. Not like really thinking about our most advanced students. Can we get their brains sweaty? You teach young kids, this is essential, I think, to not allow them to get to college before their brains sweat for the first time, or get to like their AP classes in high school before their brains sweat for the first time. That leads to a lot of problems that I can tell you about personally if you don't face challenge until you're like 20. Okay. So depth and complexity, another beware is if depth and complexity only comes from the teacher instead of coming from the student. So if the teacher is delivering the pattern and delivering the rules, and here is how this person would think about it. Here's the big idea. Students aren't thinking. The teacher has done all the thinking here and is just telling students. Thinking about how do we get students to do this thinking instead of the teacher just telling the students, here's an example of a pattern. Again, it's okay to start with that and say, here's an example of a pattern to start with, but we want students to be working with that. So instead, students should be the ones doing the thinking. And I would say, if you can get kids like spontaneously using the depth and complexity tools, like this means that they have internalized them and they're using them on their own. That they don't require you to say, think about the patterns. Like if they start yelling out, hey, I see a pattern, they're starting to internalize it and then they're using them spontaneously. Having kids shout this out, I noticed this pattern. Hey, I'm noticing, this was like the same ethical issue in this other book that we read, or that I read last year, or a movie that I saw. So when I was student teaching, we did, it was Dr. Seuss's birthday, so we do the read aloud thing, and so I went around and read to different classes. And so I was student teaching in 5th grade, and I went down to like a 2nd grade class and was reading The Giving Tree, which is my book of choice. And I remember this girl yelling out, she's like, I see an ethical issue. And she started talking about this ethical. So I had not been there very long, like I didn't really know that this was the language that the kids had learned. So I was like, what is going on here? Ethical issue. 2nd grade. But this is an example, like these kids have been taught to use them personally, and she was like noting, hey, I'm seeing something that I know how to use this tool. So that would be a goal, is for students to use them. I would say these are your tools to use. Like you all have the toolbox in your desk. Like it's not like I have the toolbox hidden up here. We should all be using the thinking tool. Okay. Thoughts, questions, examples, complaints? Okay, so a word about these official icons. I have a worry about them. My microphone's dying. These are relatively new, that there's like these color-coded icons. And I feel like they're so pretty that they make it feel like you have to use the clip art every time you use the definition class. So when I was in the classroom, these didn't exist yet. So everybody had these pretty ugly ones that they had made. Like they found all kinds of random lips and random flowers. And even though it wasn't very pretty, they were all super pixelated, because they stretched them out and put them on the wall. Even though it looked a lot uglier, I felt like it was better because there was less like, I don't feel bad about drawing weird lips on my paper when I'm doing it. So like these look so nice and color coded, I feel like I need to always color them in the right color and stuff like that. So I would encourage students, and I would do this myself in teaching, like I would just do hand-drawn versions of them. Because if you want students using these on their notes and stuff like that, like they can't be like printing out stickers or something stuff like that. So I feel like these like inhibit students from using the tools on their own. So I like the hand-drawn icons. I like students will make different versions, like everybody will have their own little different way of doing the rules icons. When I draw the pattern, I don't put all of the circles because it takes too long to draw, so I just do like circle, circle, and then lines in between. So to me, this is like, if we want students to use these, like they need to feel like I don't have to make a pretty picture. Like I can just say, I'm thinking about trends right now. Here's the wiggle line. Does that make sense? People have questions about that? I was really bad at drawing lips, and I have seen they would groan every time I would draw my lips, because they would be like, it's not how the lips look like, but they do. Okay, so this topic was beware if the teacher, it feels like the teacher owns the tools. We want students to be using the tools. Okay, so the common problems that I see that are okay in the beginning, but we want to move beyond. Trying to use all the prompts or too many at once. Putting prompts up there without a verb or without directions about how to use them. What should students be doing with the prompts? We notice like this pattern of what are the, trying to be aware when that happens and think, how could I push this a little further? And then definitely complexity is only coming from the teacher and the students aren't using it on their own. So generally, the main idea is beware if the prompts aren't dramatically like pushing students thinking in a new way, we can use them in a more powerful way to try to make that happen. Okay, so
on my search, I looked for some examples of teachers pay teachers is like, there's a ton of, and I could, I'm not gonna go buy them all, but yeah, it was on so, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so some of these are a little small because I only have the preview. So okay, here's one. It looks very nice, but if you think about what are some of the like common mistakes, like is this really pushing students, and especially thinking about our most advanced students, is it pushing them? Okay. I'm sorry if this is yours. I'm not. So somebody's like crying there. Is that like wrong? But just in terms of thinking, like, how can I push students further and go beyond just basic use? Okay, so we're going to use this with books, so we can put any book title here. Again, if we use the same thing over and over and over, students get used to it, and then they just start trying to whiz through it very quickly. So using the same worksheet over and over, I don't think that pushes thinking. We have our big idea. What is the main theme? They're just going to write. They're just going to like put the example down. What special writing techniques does the author use? I guess it would be like metaphor, simile, I don't know, suspense. But it encourages students to just write the name of the technique instead of like thinking about it. They were going to give examples, but thinking beyond just like listing. Do you notice any patterns in this book? Okay. What is the worst case situation here? yes or no? that student is awesome. But probably what they're going to do is they're going to list an example of a pattern, or they'll just say, he wakes up at the same time every morning, or he does this every time. Really just like identifying. What moral or ethical issues are raised? And they're just going to name the ethical issue and not necessarily think a lot about it. They're going to list their unanswered questions. What changes over time? What doesn't change? This is like 3 questions in one box, and so our students going to answer all 3 of those. It's not totally clear, but they're probably just going to list things. Oh, now this one. How would this book or story be different if it were written from a different point of view? This one is the one that I would take out of this box and make it just its own thing. Because this is juicy, and this is something where we could spend like a very long time, and hopefully we will make more than just this little box of answers. Because now this is an example of pushing students thinking a lot more. All the other stuff is more like, do you understand the story? So assuming the students understand the story, what can we actually do with it? And so rewrite the story from somebody else's point of view is an example of much more interesting thinking. However, because there's so many questions on this worksheet, we're not going to get great work there and this is the last one too, so the kid's like, almost done with my work, and they're going to do like the least amount of effort here. So thinking about it from the student's point of view, this is the most interesting one, but they'll probably put the least effort into it at the end. Okay, this one's very tiny. I'm assuming the kids would know what to do with this because there's no directions on here. But again, we just have these, we have the prompts, but they're just by themselves. So the natural tendency is just to list things, like listing vocabulary, listing big ideas, I guess, unanswered questions. This person also put copyright and then their name at the bottom, which I thought was funny, so don't sue me. This is a really common graphic organizer to use with the depth and complexity tools. It's called a frame. And you would put your topic in the middle here, so the Cat in the Hat or civil rights movement. And then you can use the prompt to dig into whatever that topic is. This one has just the icons, no directions, so you're probably just going to get students listing. And we have a double frame, there's 2 layers. So there's 8 different tools to use. It's going to be low level of thinking, most likely. Here's a version, again, of the frame, but now it has a little more to it. We'll look at these ones later. They are not depth and complexity, but what are the different perspectives on Veterans Day? Probably just a list. It would be more interesting to push students further than that. What are some important words? We're just going to give a list of words. Here's another frame example. Looks like preamble. Again, just the icons by themselves is just going to lead to listing. If you, I think unanswered questions about the preamble could be a whole thing on its own. Like, that could be super interesting. Or if you did unanswered questions from different people's perspectives, like really just picking one tool sometimes can lead to much more interesting thinking. Okay, so those are common problems. Again, I did all of these and continue to do them. And they're not necessarily bad all the time, but they're like, you don't want to limit students with these. Okay, thoughts? All right. If you have a question as we're going, please feel free to flag me down. Okay, so those are kind of common things that might limit you to kind of a beginning level. The biggest thing to understand is that the depth and complexity prompts are like part of a larger like framework to use. And a lot of those problems come out of just ever seeing the icons and not seeing the rest of this puzzle. So this is this like equation we're going to use as a way to break down like how depth and complexity is part of a larger thing. When I was a student teaching, my master teacher, we were going to do my first lesson, and she wrote this out, but she didn't even write the words out. She just wrote the letters. So she had TS plus DC plus R plus P, and she's like, "Do you know what this means?" I was like, "Oh my god, I'm going to get fired from student teaching." I don't know what that means. And so I learned this with my master teacher. It's like, it totally changed the way that I approach using the depth and complexity tools. So each of these, so we have four like pieces of this puzzle, and each one you can think of, or I think of it as like different like levers or different like ways to adjust the complexity, but also like adjusting it for certain students. So we can adjust each of these depending on what we want students to be doing. Okay, so thinking skill plus depth and complexity. This is like if this one thing unlocks like all of this new power in the prompts themselves and pushes us beyond just making lists of things. This is where we're thinking about what do we want students to do. This thinking skill gives them the instructions to use the prompt. If you have a hammer, you also need something to tell you what you're supposed to do with the hammer. Okay, and we saw this idea. The default and all the online examples are all what are. So the thinking skill here is really just list or identify, which is pretty low level. If the thinking skill or the question itself is low order and you add depth and complexity to it, it's still low order thinking. They're just looking at the content a little bit differently, but the actual thinking remains low level. Okay, so we're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy. We want to think about Bloom's plus the depth and complexity tools, and how each level like affects this tool in a different way. Evaluate is very different than remember when we're using the prompts. All right, so list the rules of the US Constitution. It's fine to do. But if you start thinking about what if I climb Bloom's taxonomy, what can kids start to do? So if we do compare and contrast as our thinking skill instead of identify, list, first we have to think about, well, what are they going to compare and contrast with? And we can bring something new in. Some people will say, I do not teach Japan's constitution. I would say, that's okay. Your most advanced students are ready to do more than just list the rules of the US Constitution. Just those kids can learn about another constitution. And a lot of these kids, if you say, you 5, I want you to use the computer and go find another constitution and see if you can list those rules. And then we're going to compare and contrast. Some kids will be like, what? There's other constitutions? Like this enrichment idea is really powerful. So learning about Japan's constitution might be super interesting, and then we can compare and contrast and see what's similar, what's different. So even if it's not part of your content, not all your students have to do it, but your most advanced students might really enjoy this. Thinking about apply, I really like apply combined with depth and complexity because it can do some really interesting things. So if students did this one, if they compared and contrasted and they know about Japan's constitution and what the differences are, now what if we said, hey, constitution switch, we're going to switch constitutions, how would this work? What would it be like if we changed to another country's constitution in the United States? This is probably beyond your grade level expectations, but that's fine. It's fine to go beyond the grade level standards. Sometimes I feel like there is we feel like we can't do that, but some of you kids are desperately hungry for something like this, and this could be really enjoyable. We could go up to evaluate. We could do some kind of a judgment. You could do all kinds of different things if we're judging rules or evaluating rules. We might say which ones are least fair, which ones are the most interesting or the most unusual. Instead of just listing, if we can push students to evaluation. This create level, once you start having students work at these higher levels, I feel like there's a natural, there's a magnet at the create level that pulls certain students there, and they will start to ask, could I do this? Could I make my own? Or they will go home and do this on their own. There's this interesting pull as they get interested in the topic that they naturally want to make their own version of it. So the idea of, hey, we've done interesting interactions with the Constitution. What if you were going to make a Constitution? At the end of the year, I taught ancient civilizations in social studies, and so at the end of the year, we would make our own civilization. And I had really pretty basic requirements that kids had to do, and every year, they would go so far beyond those requirements when they were given this opportunity to create. And kids would, this was not a requirement, but kids would make a set of laws. And I had one student who printed it out and burned the edges of his laws to make it look old. No, that was not any kind of direction, but the natural instinct to want to try to make something is really strong with some students. Okay, so this is a starting point, and it could lead to a lot of interesting thinking. Right. Questions, thoughts, examples? This image of a lot of these are giving students brains sweating in a way that just doing the low level of blooms will not. What would it be like if we used Japan's constitution? Is very ambiguous. I don't know exactly, there's not necessarily one right way to look at that, so we get kids really having to think and grapple with some interesting ideas. Okay, so we're going to look at each level here and just look at some examples of how you might use these. You could use them in totally different ways, but just thinking about what might it look like to use depth and complexity at each level of balloons. So we're going to climb up. Something I think is really important is you cannot start up at the high level. Kids will not do a good job if you just stick them at evaluate to start with. So you really want to think about, how can I scaffold my way up here? And a lot of times that means just starting with making a list. It's fine to start with, and then we can climb up balloons. So if we look at something like the remember level or understand, they're great starting points to move to something bigger later. Graphic organizers are, if you think about how you might connect the thinking with graphic organizers, a lot of times certain graphic organizers connect to certain levels of Bloom's taxonomy really well. So if I'm asking students just to list, let's come up with a whole bunch of these. This is circle map. Do you guys use thinking maps? People are saying yes. just a basic unordered, unorganized brainstorming tool. Let's list all the rules of the US Constitution that we know. List them all. Let's list the different ways that people might think about long division, or different people might use long division. Let's think of all the problems we might run into when we're doing long division. Let's try to think of all the ethical issues, all the problems. Can somebody think of a problem when you're doing long division? Common mistake. Okay. Okay, yeah, place value, they don't line it out. So that might be one. Oh, sometimes I don't line up the place value. Sometimes I don't subtract from the right thing. Okay, I don't understand the remainder, like might be one that's common, like I get the remainder, I don't know what it means. Yeah.
Just confusing the rules. What am I doing when? Which operation am I using when?
Yeah, what's the order? Yeah, so that might be an example. Let's list all the problems we have with long division. This would be an interesting thing to do, is like go through all this. And then you could go and do something else with it afterwards. Okay, you might do this, and then you might also say, what are all the problems with doing multiplication? And then we can compare and contrast other similar problems. Place value might be one we could say. If both multiplication and division, sometimes I mess up the place value. So this would be interesting thinking even about math, where they're not doing the calculations, but they're thinking about their calculations. Okay, so remember, understand, like these might be things where we just make lists, we make a big brainstorm. It's fun, it's great, it can be really great to start with that. But don't limit kids to just 3. Say, try to come up with 20. Come up with as many of these as you can. Like that's the purpose of the list level. Okay, then apply. So I think apply is really fun, and especially combined with depth and complexity. Okay, so here's like a template of something you might use if you're trying to think, how could I use apply combined with depth and complexity? You do not have to use a template, just a template. So you put one of the prompts here, so we're going to apply the patterns. Okay, something that I taught in science was plate tectonics, and we learned about how to build a structure that's safe when there's an earthquake. We would learn about the patterns of them. Kids know the patterns, so now we're not just listing, now we're going to apply the patterns. I know this is off the top of your head, but can anybody think of a situation you could take this knowledge and then apply it to that's different than the exact thing you might be learning about? A cake, nice. If you're going to build a cake that is earthquake safe, and you want to use some of the ideas we've learned, some of these patterns, we don't use it all the time, it's not a rule, but it's a pattern. What would your cake be like so that it can survive an earthquake? Or somebody like moving it from the van into the wedding? Anything else you can think of that we might apply? What's that? Democracy. So say some force comes along and shakes democracy really hard. How could we use some of these ideas? How can we use the dampener or the different cross beams? You know, this kind of thinking, some of our kids excel at, and they don't get a chance to do it a lot. But if you were to apply this, it sounds like, wow, third grader can't come up with this. But some of them will be like, I have 10 ideas right now. So it could be super fun and interesting. Okay. My example was much less interesting than both of those. We made gingerbread houses. So when we were making our gingerbread houses, we're trying to use the same structure ideas that we learned about real buildings. Okay, so applying the patterns to a new situation. We learned about how to calculate area of a bunch of different shapes. So once we know how to do that, we don't want to keep practicing just the calculations. So what can we do with it? So we applied it to, the idea was that we're all going to design a hotel room's layout, and there's a bunch of ways that you can apply the area formulas to that situation. So taking a pause, thinking about this one, as we started to think about applying the rules, these other two started to become important. So resources are what are students going to have so they can do this next thing, and then what are they going to make in the end? So resources, kids might have a textbook, but if we're asking students to try to design a cake, they're going to need something else. Like they need something to tell them about cakes. So we have to sometimes add additional resources, and then what are students going to make? If I'm going to ask students to do a high-level thinking task, I need to think about how can I support this with the information they need. If we're studying Japan's constitution all of a sudden, it's not in any of our grade level textbooks, how are they going to get that information? If we're going to compare and contrast we're jumping up here a little bit, but if we're going to compare and contrast the ethics of these two conflicts, so I might be teaching American Revolution, but I want students to compare and contrast with another conflict, then I need to give them some kind of resources that will tell them about that other thing. It will require resources beyond like our grade level topic. This is a lot easier with the internet now. In the past, I think you had to go to the library and check out like 1,000 books and bring them in. But you can think about what is there our textbook? Do we need to bring an article? Are there videos we could enable for students to watch? Okay, back to our idea of applying the rules of calculating area to a hotel room's layout. My students need something beyond just the textbook in this situation. So I gave them a whole bunch of IKEA catalogs. And so this was like resources they need, like how big are beds? How big is a rug or a sofa or a chair? And so using this, they were then going to furnish their hotel room. Another thing we looked at is they looked at websites so they can see like how big is a typical hotel room. So they looked at that kind of information, like how are we going to give them that information so that they can ask. Textbook, you can be a resource. We can give students videos. Websites, photographs can be resources. Articles. Talking to experts could be an example of a resource, giving them access to somebody who knows a lot about the topic. We did a bridge building exercise with our 6th graders across all 4 of our classrooms, and one of the teachers knew an engineer. So this guy would come in every year and do like a day where he went to each of the 4 classrooms, and students got to ask him questions about how to build the bridge the best way. So he was an interesting resource for them to use. And kids would ask the most embarrassing questions. It was like, sorry, they asked that, sorry. Other books, an experiment, like I could run an experiment, that could be an example of a resource. And having students take measurements, if you're doing math kind of things, like letting them use a measuring tape and like gather those, that would be another way for them to get information that they need. I did a math project that involved kids going out and measuring like the slide and like figuring out how big stuff was. So giving them that measuring tape is an example of a resource. Okay, so that's the idea of the resource. If we're pushing kids' thinking up, then we're probably going to have to give them more ways to get the information. And then the product is, what are students going to make in the end? If they've done this interesting thinking, what are they going to create? I'm going back. What do you want students to make? If we're using a graphic organizer, like those are good scaffolds or like halfway points. But a lot of times I see the graphic organizer as the end, and it gets like the grade. But I don't think the graphic organizer should usually be the end product. It should be a way for students to do their thinking, and then they should make something out of it. So maybe we do a Venn diagram, but we should go on and make something more interesting. So I always think in this case, thinking about what are my students good at this year? Because every year, there's kids with different unexpected talents. So, I mean, one year I had this group of artists that was outrageously talented as compared to other classes I had had. Some students might like building things. Is there a way we can have the product somehow integrate building? Kids who really enjoy writing. I had a student one year who he played guitar really well, and he liked to write songs, and so, you know, is there a way that I can sometimes connect a music piece to my product? Some kids really like to act, and they like to do skits, so they're good, like, presenters. I was not a big fan of skits in the classroom, because they would always devolve into screaming, and people, like, falling onto the ground, like, every time. So I just wouldn't offer skits. And then I had a year where this kid was like, how come we never do skits? And I was like, oh, my own prejudice has made my class less enjoyable. So then I tried to figure out how to do skits in a less annoying way. But could we do something where kids get to act it out? Kids who enjoy using technology, is there a way that the product can somehow connect to these things? And this is a great place to add choice. Like, you could offer multiple ways for students to show the final product. So here's an example of like a task statement where we have our thinking skills contrast. Our topic, again, is our US Constitution. We're going to contrast two different perspectives. You have your class notes, you have the textbook, you have this video that I found that you can use on the class website. We might make a Venn diagram as part of the thinking, but I don't want 36 Venn diagrams coming in as the final product. So there's a lot of things you could do with this. You could create a rap battle. Students could just write an essay. They could make a video, they could, you know, if we think about it, what are all the ways that they could show us the same information just using something that interests them? We get a really interesting final product. Again, this is a way to add student choice. They can choose. If we're thinking about the problems, the potential problems of elements of the periodic table, we're going to ask them to make a ranking this time, so we're evaluating. We might give them extra resources. What are some things that we could have students make at the end of this so they can show their thinking, they can show what they've learned while they're doing this? Would you discuss with somebody around you? What are some things that students can make to show me that they have done the thinking? If you'll start to wrap up. Students have gone through, they've probably listed problems, they've compared and contrasted, now they've done a ranking of the biggest problems. What could they create to show us their thinking? Ideas, yeah?
You can build a scientific experiment to cause most damage possible.
They could come up with an experiment that would cause the most damage possible. You don't have to do the experiment, but they could design the experiment. That sounds very fun. Other things that they can make. Yeah?
We were talking about you could make like trading cards, like Pokemon cards, and they all have powers and you have like battles.
Oh my goodness. So you can make like Pokemon kind of cards, trading cards for the different thing, and then they can battle using their problems.
They could do like an infographic if they were really techy.
Yeah.
They could create one and put all the info and problems and
Like an infographic.
videos even.
Yeah. To design some kind of visual way of seeing. Yeah.
Picture bucket for each element has characteristics.
So a picture book and then the character's going to experience each of the potential problems with the elements. Yeah. A beauty pageant. Oh, so they all get like an award? Oh, nice, okay. I can see kids dressing up as the element. Yeah.
If they each became one of the elements, I had to have like a group therapy session.
It's a group therapy session, and it's like each person is being a different element. Or some students might write it. It could be like a whole story they write. All right, so this is I always like, if I want to stop the presentation and go like make one of these things, I feel like these are really interesting, you know. These are all great. Let's see what I came up with. Okay, so mine are not going to be quite as great. Public service announcement. So if you want to, this could be a video, this could be a skit. Here's like warnings about these things. Like if Subway, not the sandwiches, but the actual Subway. If you're going to make these like posters that are warning people, like our artists could make a series of posters about the elements. So I have a story, so we had our picture book idea. So I have a story where we're going to see the problems and, you know, which ones are the worst. A children's song. You could offer these as choice. You could just make one. You could have kids work in groups. But the idea is that it should be showing, okay, I should be able, if I read this children's song or hear it, I should be able to tell, okay, this kid knows the content. A skit, I did a skit. Well, this is one way that I got around the screening, was I tried to make them really short. Okay, we got 3 minutes for this. Okay, apply if you're thinking about Ben Franklin, we learned about how he thinks. What if he were a student at our school? What would he do? Like, how would he follow those rules if he were a student instead of whatever Ben Franklin was? Use some resources. We give them a bunch of resources that they have. They might need more resources in the textbook. They could make an essay, like that is a legitimate product. Maybe they're gonna make a video, and he's doing like a YouTube like selfie kind of a video. Maybe he writes an instruction manual. So like, here's how you should approach life as a student. Okay, so here's we're going to apply the rules of calculating an area to the hotel room layout. We use hotels' websites, we use our IKEA catalog, and students had to measure different things. And so their final result might be a scale model. If we don't have time to make a scale model, we might make blueprints, or we might make ads, or we might do something different. So the product is a good place to add, if you have time, that kids can make something much bigger. If you don't have time, you can do a smaller, simpler product. But the product is often a place where you can get kids to ask if they can take it home and work on it, because they get super into it, and they want to, you know, it's like their hobby now is finishing this assignment. Compare and contrast the ethical issues of the American Revolution with the Civil War. Again, thinking about what are these different ways that we could allow students to show deeper thinking. Oh, this is the best. Eventually, again, just like the idea, students start spontaneously using the tools. Once they've done a bunch of fun products, eventually somebody is going to start recommending products. And they're like, I like your choices here, but what if I did this instead? What if I made a board game? And then I just want to make sure, like, the board game's going to show me that you know the stuff. Like, you're going to show me your thinking. And then, you know, they can make their board game if they want. But this is an exciting thing for me, is when students start to suggest product ideas, because they're usually better than my ideas that I would have. And then I really try to emphasize with them, I'm not grading the art of the board game, I'm not grading your acting ability. We are looking for your thinking. I want to see what kind of thinking you did. Do you know the stuff? So coming back to making sure that we're grading your thinking. Okay, look at that one. Okay, so we learned about ancient Rome's government as part of social studies. What if we applied those rules, and now the school is no longer set up how it's normally set up? Now we have ancient Rome's government is the style rule. So we don't have a principal, we have like a consul, or 2 consuls. What would the school run like if we had to follow ancient Rome's rules? Again, we can give them, whatever, we might need to give them more resources if we want deeper thinking, and then what are we going to make it again? Oh yeah, and you can change the focus by changing what prompt you're using. It will adjust it. So if we're thinking just about the rules, we would think about, okay, we need this many people at this level, we need this, how big the Senate's going to be. If instead we say, hey, let's think about all the ethical problems of ancient Rome's government, and now we have those problems at our school, what would it be like? So we're like focusing their thinking on a more specific piece of this content. If we learned about Brian and Hatchet, we read the story, what if we're going to apply his perspective to the school day? What could we go on to make? Okay, so this is the apply kind of template that we were using, just applying a prompt from our content to some new situation that we didn't actually learn about. Does anybody have an idea that you have thought of related to something you would teach, or you might apply? Let's say like a minute, you could discuss, see if you can come up with an idea, an example of using this kind of a template. Does anybody have an example? You don't have to do the entire thing, but a way students might apply to something to a new situation.
I think for this one, specifically for Hatchet, maybe like a survival show.
Okay, so they can use Brian's multiple perspectives in the school day and create a survivalist video. Other examples, you can go beyond just that one. Yeah.
Well, we're doing the outsiders, so I was thinking could they apply like the values of the socials and racers, the two gangs to place in their schools.
Okay.
School something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Create
Taking the perspectives of the two gangs,
yeah.
and then could we somehow apply that to, do we see something similar in ours?
yeah, like the patterns and the school,
Yeah.
or the trends.
Yeah.
Right now I have two Indian girls from India in my class, and I read them The Chocolate Touch, and there's the chapter of the birthday party. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's all about this. It's in the 50s, and this beautiful blonde gal with her little princess dress and her Mary Jane shoes and apple volley and all the traditional American games that people play. And I said, I want you to try to put this in India, in your family, or what would you be wearing? What are the names of those things? How are you going to
Yeah.
recreate this with the food and the games and the music and that kind of thing? So I'm curious
Yeah.
to see what you thought of.
Right, so you're like applying like the details or the patterns of a book in America to how would you redo this in India?
Right.
Yeah.
Giving them
All right, anybody else have one you want to share? All right, so this I think applies really interesting. We're asking students to think about something in a new context we did not teach them about, and they have to do the thinking. And again, it's just like one prompt, one question, but it can slow students way down, and we want to get their brains sweating. Like they should have to sit and think about it. And not all students have to do the same thing. Okay, we're going to analyze. When I think of analyze, I think of compare and contrast. So again, just think about like a template. Very similar, but now we're going to, CC stands for compare and contrast. Some prompt of some content with some other content. So this is one that we looked at. And the second thing should be something we haven't necessarily taught them about. So this could be an area for enrichment if we want it to be. So for some students, if we are learning about the American Revolution and they get it, it might be interesting to ask them to go quickly learn about some other conflict, and then now we can compare and contrast those two. So this can go beyond the content, grade level content, but it doesn't have to. Again, thinking about this thinking skill, plus depth and complexity, we may need to give them more resources, and then what are we going to have them make at the end that is not just a graphic organizer? I did this with my students, again, ancient Civ example, but we learned about some famous leaders, so we're going to compare and contrast them. How would Julius Caesar handle the situation versus Alexander the Great? Give them different resources, what are students going to make in the end? Venn diagram, great way for students to just scaffold the idea. We're specifically thinking about what is Julius Caesar's perspective, what is Alexander the Great's perspective, how are they similar, how are they different? Language of the disciplines, compare and contrast. Math example, if we've learned about quadrilaterals, we've learned about circles, the language that we use for the two content areas are different. We can compare and contrast what are similarities and what are differences here. Yeah.
I mean, like on the previous slide, it still feels like you're just listing and just grouping the similar listings, though, to some extent. Like when you're contrasting them.
So in this case, the difference is...
On the previous slide, I guess. Yeah, it just feels like, I mean, to me, it feels like you're still listing, it's just, you're taking similar listings and just grouping them.
So in this case, we're going to be comparing and contrasting them. So that's the thinking skill. Is most of these will involve some kind of a list in the beginning, and then the thinking is we're going to compare and contrast them and then make something. So if I'm going to compare and contrast these two, in the end, I might have students make a skit or do a talk show. Or something.
Just the transition.
Right. So this is not the product.
Okay.
This is like a scaffold to help students do the thinking. And Venn diagram is the compare and contrast scaffold. If we're learning about the language disciplines of quadrilaterals or circles, we're not learning about them both at the same time. So in this case, we're going back to a previous unit probably and saying, did you notice like what words are the same and what words are different when we're talking about these? So area is the same. Perimeter and circumference are different to talk about how far outside it is. So we compare and contrast. What are they going to make in the end to show the similarities and differences in the language of these two example shapes? I always, now I like skits, so I like default to a skit, and I always want the content to like meet each other at some kind of a party. So I would say, okay, some rectangle is going to meet some circle, and they're going to like talk, and they're not going to have the same language all the time, and the rectangle will be like, what do you mean, circumference? I don't understand what that is. And he's like, wow, yeah, I don't understand what a perimeter is. So looking at the fact that we're comparing and contrasting. Yeah.
Or they can look at the Guggenheim museums and they can both critique it.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So they could critique the Guggenheim, or they could, yeah, talk about some other topic, and they would have to use their language. Okay, I forgot I had this idea, that maybe they're going to write poems to each other, and they have to, like, talk about their similarities and differences. My sixth graders love writing romantic poems about boring content. Okay, so these are similar in some way, different in another way. It helps students understanding if they compare and contrast and try to build that thinking. Venn diagram would be a helpful scaffold, but in the end, we want them to make something that shows the comparing and contrasting. So maybe they're going to make a round. I really like ethical issues with math topics because it encourages students to think about problems that they run into. So if we're solving systems of equations, doing like algebra, there's different methods for solving it. So I think anytime you have different ways that kids might solve a problem, talking about like, what are the ethical issues, what are the problems, the pros and the cons of the different ways, and then we can compare and contrast the problems into different ways of solving something. And then, what are something interesting to make in the end. It doesn't always have to be something that's super fun and creative, but it encourages you to think about, well, how could we do this and it's not just a Venn diagram, or it's not just a paragraph. So compare and contrasting content with some other content. It may be something you teach, it may be outside. You might need other resources, but then what is the product going to be in the end? Another way to use analyze is to have students categorize things. So if we're studying these different geometric shapes, and they listed the rules earlier, I might ask them now to categorize the rules and put them into different groups. And the key here is you don't give them the groups. Like they have to do this analyzing in their brain. Like they have to think about, okay, I know what the rules are for these shapes. How can I create categories of rules? And then come up with the names for the groups. So a table would be an example of a graphic organizer for something like this. You have to think about all these rules you know. How are they similar? How are they different? How can we make categories? So kids might come up with, oh, they all have rules related to the length of their sides, or the measure of their angles, how many parallel sides they are. So I would not give them that because that's part of analyzing, is trying to find those similarities. Might categorize the essential details of different biomes. So what are the adaptations we learned about for animals and plants in the tundra versus the rainforest and the desert? Let's create 3 groups. You have to label the groups and come up with the groups. Out of order. Maybe we've read 3 stories. I want you to think about what are some patterns we saw in these stories, and then categorize those patterns into different groups. And you have to come up with the names of the groups. For an example, they might notice there's patterns in the protagonists in these stories. There's patterns in the setting, or there's patterns in the theme. I don't know, a 4th one. So if they have to do the analysis, like that's the goal, is for them to come up with the patterns, then for them to come up with the category names. Okay, so analyze is like compare and contrast, make categories. There should be some kind of like looking at multiple things and trying to note either similarities or differences. Evaluate. We looked a little bit at an example of evaluate, but one thing you might do is rank. So we did the elements, the ethical issues of the elements. If you're doing some kind of lab, the students might have to learn about lab safety. So instead of just listing the rules, let's try to rank the rules. Which ones are most important, which ones are easiest to follow. So giving them criteria will change the way that they rank these. So you can give them different criteria and it will affect the thinking that they're doing. How easy are they to follow versus how important is the rule? Somebody think of another way you might rank the rules of lab safety.
Based on importance.
Importance.
Potential injury.
Potential injury, like if you don't follow it. Okay.
Likeliness of occurring.
Oh, okay. Likeliness of the actual problem occurring. Oh, most ignored, yeah. Fun. Okay, so all these different ways, and all of these your students would have to think about it in different ways. And you might even have to go back and redo the ranking and say, yeah, if you're just having them make the rank, that's pretty fast. And then so you say, okay, re-rank, we're gonna re-rank. And then students are doing a lot of thinking about these rules, where otherwise they might just do like a really simple worksheet. I have another example. How effective it is, and then thinking about resources and then products. Again, this criteria can really affect students' thinking. So we might do ethical issues that US presidents have faced, and then how much did it influence the country? So maybe there are some ethical issues that didn't really have a big impact, and there are some that really, like, we had to make all new laws or something like that. What language within trigonometry is most important, or most unusual, most useless? Like, giving students interesting ways to rank it can get them thinking more. Okay, so ranking is one way to use evaluation plus the language of the discipline or whatever prompt. Okay, so another way is to think about it as judging. So I really like this. This is like my go-to. If I can't think of a way to make something more interesting and more complex, this is my go-to thing. Is to ask students to judge the details, judge something about content, and then ask them to use something else's perspective. So example would be, we're learning about Abraham Lincoln. What would George Washington think about Abraham Lincoln? So we really have to go back probably to the low end of Bloom's and like list what did George Washington do? What did he think was important? We'll probably have to compare and contrast them. We'll do some analyzing, and before we can really effectively judge from George Washington's perspective. Like this is really complex thinking. And it's fun, like students like the idea of thinking from this other person's perspective. They like to use voices, or they like to dress up, or they like to make a comic book, or it lends itself to pretty interesting products. But having things that don't have opinions suddenly have opinions is really fun, and again, it really pushes their thinking. So if we learn about DNA and RNA, what would RNA think about DNA? We might think about what patterns do we see in these two things. And then you can switch it, what would DNA think about RNA? I don't really know this content, but I've had people say that DNA would like look down on RNA because it's like incomplete. We get these like personalities naturally emerging from things that don't have personalities. What would division think about fractions, or what would division think about multiplication, or what would fractions think about decimals? So using two pieces of content to judge each other Okay, so I like to show this example. I showed this is a teacher in Ohio, so I had done this presentation in Ohio about this idea of using perspectives. So she went and did this the next day. So it's low prep, like you don't have to spend hours making a whole bunch of it's like one little direction. And so she used dividends and divisors. So I love that, to me, this is pretty boring content. It's like remembering the difference and the definition. But look at all this writing that, these are two different students, that they did about dividends, talking about how they feel about divisors. Oh, these are fourth graders, and this is like September 28th. So sort of like brand new fourth graders, and what this person produced here. I thought, what a great example. And this goes like on and on, like it's not even done here. And certainly not every student in this class produced this, but like think about what this student got to do, and she never would have had this opportunity to think this much about dividends and divisors, but like this way of using multiple perspectives, using a judgment, is pretty impressive. I really want to meet this kid. Like, what fourth grader uses the chopped liver idiom? Like, it's very interesting. Okay, so thinking about so as we're looking at this, like climbing up balloons, these aren't really one-step tasks. Like these are things that will probably require students to do multiple things. So whether it's a low level of balloons, just having them list the rules, there's a lot more we could do, but this is a starting point. But if we went to a really high level and said, now we're going to create, and you're going to create, if you're studying the 13 colonies, let's make a new colony, we just discovered it, and you're going to create this colony's, the rules of that colony's government. If you just give students this, you end up with a bunch of silly answers that aren't really that great. Some kids will do a good job, but they really need the low level to like help them get here. So like they need to list, they need to compare and contrast, they need to do those apply kind of steps, and then create a new colony's government is achievable and at a much higher level of quality if we go up those steps. So think about, if we're asking students to go high up balloons, think about what is the sequence that we could use to scaffold up to a really high level. Like ranking, if you're going to rank how dangerous the different elements are, it's helpful to start by just listing what we know about those elements to start with, and then comparing and contrasting, and then it's a lot easier to do the ranking. So this, I think, is important. Like kids should be moving around the Bloom's taxonomy as they're going through a task. Just starting to create will usually end up with like goofy stuff that's not really necessarily that high level of thinking. If we're going to judge which government has better rules, kids will be more successful and will get better thinking out of them if we start by just explain the government's rules. Then let's compare and contrast. And then maybe this is a third step. Now we're going to do this judging thing. All right, so instead of one-step tasks, thinking about how can I create a sequence that's going to scaffold students higher and push them. And more students will be successful when we give them this kind of scaffold. Some students can just do it, they're like superstars, but there's some kids who could do it if we provided a little more of a scaffold. Okay. So we mentioned this in the beginning, but the goal isn't just to like use the thinking tools. Our goal is to really think about that. Am I pushing students' thinking? Are they being forced to like slow down, put their pencil down, do some thinking, instead of like rushing through everything? This idea of like, is your brain sweating? And I would use this like imagery with students, and I would talk about that. Because some kids will start to get frustrated because they've never had to think this hard before, or something where there's not a clear right answer. And so I would say, hey, your brain is sweaty right now, and you're not used to it. Just like if you went and ran 5 miles, you would have a hard time doing that. So like you're experiencing this, like brain sweating for the first time. Okay. Do we have thoughts, questions? Just thinking of our time. These were common problems I mentioned at the beginning. Just be aware of, sometimes it's more effective to use 1, 2, 3 prompts that you really pick that match that content well. Just having one of the icons just sitting there by itself without the verb, kids are just going to default to the easiest possible thing, which is usually make a list. This is really common. If you look on the internet for help with depth and complexity, you're just going to see this, what are the. We push up Bloom's taxonomy, we get a lot more interesting stuff. Sometimes we don't want to just deliver depth and complexity. Here's an example of a pattern. We want students to be using those tools. Just being aware, we want the prompts to be pushing students' thinking. That's like the reason that they exist. We did not introduce those. Okay. Quickly, if you have never seen these are called the content imperatives. There's 5 of them. I have an article on the website that will explain them, but they are meant to be used in conjunction with depth and complexity, and they take it to a whole nother level. All right, so like I said in the beginning, this is my email. If you want to get a hold of me, I'd love to hear from you, even if it's like 3 months from now and you're like trying something and you need help. If students do something cool, I'd love to see it. If it doesn't work, I'd love to hear about it, and maybe we can fix it. I'll have the slides here later tonight, probably, so you can download if you didn't get everything written down. But otherwise, thank you guys for being here. It was great talking to you, and enjoy the rest of your week.